this in Hebrew, so it will be in English. And I didn't quite know how much you all knew about Belgium, so there will be parts about Belgian history and others more, maybe a little more sophisticated on internal Belgian problems. And I'm not quite going to talk about the failure. I'm going to ask whether it is a success or a failure to be a binational state. And I'm not quite sure whether I agree with myself on the answer. Because when I met Morty, who invited me to this conference 10 years ago almost, my prognosis was that Belgium would disappear. And today, although things are going less well, I'm not quite sure that Belgium will disappear. And maybe even after 2 years without government, Belgium is not doing that bad. Okay, so this is a map of Belgium for those who don't know Belgium that well. And in the middle of the Flemish part of the country in the north, there's Brussels. So Brussels is an enclave, a French-speaking enclave within Flanders. So should Belgium split, the question is what to do with Brussels. And that's one of the main questions. It's not only Europe, it's not only about nationalism, it's not only about distributive justice between the north and the south, between the Catholic north and the socialist south. It's also about Brussels in the middle of Flanders. So on first sight, binationalism in Belgium is a failure. Belgium has not always been a binational state. But let's see whether things are that clear. This is what one political science specialist and journalist said in 1996. The country's other community, meaning the Flemish for the Walloons and vice versa, is practically a foreign people. It's rather difficult for a political system to keep functioning with such mutual ignorance, also linguistic ignorance, and hence such lack of mutual understanding of the two halves of the country. That is still true. The Flemish speak English, a little bit of French. The French speakers hardly speak Flemish anymore, and they are not very good at English either. That's true for all French people. So when we have conferences with both parts of the country, we do not speak Flemish or French anymore, but we speak English. This is what the New York Times did last year in September, 6 months ago. They had this special issue on the future of the world and the future of countries like Belgium. And they prognosed that Belgium would finally split up, and they had a whole regime of reasons why Belgium will split up. And this is what they wrote. Okay, so that was last year. That was when Belgium still did not have a government. What about today? Belgium is a federal state that can function without a government. Proof of the pudding is that during 540 days, Belgium lived without a government, and rather well. They finally found a government because we needed to vote a budget, and Europe pushed into that direction. Okay, so 540 days without government, but at the same time the election of a Flemish nationalistic party in the north of the country, and another constitutional revision in sight for 2014 probably. So what is the state of the Union today? And this is what I'm going to try to answer really fast in order not to get those flags. Okay, so Belgium when Belgium was created in 1830, was a unitarian state. The French-speaking bourgeoisie created the state with a constitutional monarchy on an Orleanist French model, and this unitarian Belgium, shifted towards this binational state that we have today, with the enclave in the north of the country, and without any kind of solidarity and without any kind of overlapping electoral district. Meaning that both parts of the country live completely independently one from the other, because there are no overlapping political parties anymore, no overlapping electoral district. There's the king, but the king has no power other than symbolic, which is important, and no redistribution from the north to the south and vice versa. Okay. So why does Belgium not function as it has functioned until the 70s? The classical answer that political scientists usually give is that the cleavages in the country overlap. As I said earlier, Catholic north, socialist south. Rural north, industrial south. Two different languages, two nationalist movements that are quite strong, especially in the north of the country, plus the religious difference and not knowing what to do with Brussels in the middle. The Flemish part of the country today is far richer than the Walloon part of the country, but that has not always been like that. In the beginning of the century, it was the south that nourished the north. Today, it's exactly the other way around. And the Flemish today say, why should we pay for the Walloons? We have a far higher income. I will show you a graph. Why would be responsible for the southern part of the country? So this is the history of Belgium in a nutshell. Unitarian and French, then a very classical, popular Flemish cultural national movement in the 19th century that was patriotic, not necessarily against the Belgian state, but wanting to push its own language griefs and wanted to be recognized as a second nation within the Belgian state. The Walloons responded by creating their own kind of national movement, and from then on we had an ongoing federalization. 3 constitutional revisions that were made to pacify the relations between the two parts of the country. I skipped the First and the Second World War. From the 1790s until the 90s, 3 major constitutional revisions that divided administratively the country. But these constitutional revisions were made to pacify tensions between the two parts of the country and in some matter reconcile the two parts. The exact opposite has occurred, and this division, this new constitutional architecture, in fact, has created 2 separate entities that do not really negotiate anymore because there's a normative autonomy within both parts of the country. Even diplomats are representatives of their part of the country, of the region Flanders or the region Wallonia. Furthermore, the region and the community, the language community and the parliament overlap in Flanders and they don't in Wallonia. Brussels is French-speaking, Wallonia is French-speaking, but both the two are 2 different entities with 2 different agendas, 2 different parliaments. Okay, let's skip this one. Binationalism, questions. How should we deal with the question whether binationalism could be a success or a failure in Belgium, but maybe also elsewhere? I think there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions that we should ask. 1, is it a democratic country and what kind of democracy? Parliamentary, what kind of electoral system, proportional, and so forth. 2, what is the distribution of income and welfare? I will show you the graph. They're very different. What type of nationalism? You can have a thin type of nationalism, a liberal type of nationalism that is okay politically, and you can have an aggressive kind of nationalism, such as in Flanders. Are there language differences? That must not be a problem in itself, but what are the language policies to sustain those differences? What's the federal architecture? Is it a dissociative or an associative federalism, like in Germany, for instance? What about political legitimacy? As I said before, the political legitimacy of a representative of the south of the country has no accountability and no legitimacy in the other part of the country. So that's a problem for a unitarian state, of course. And electoral districts, as I said before, one of the solutions would be, for instance, to have at least a part of a common electoral district in order to have accountability in both parts of the country. Okay, welfare. This is the graph I wanted to show you. This is Wallonian. This is a comparison between income and welfare. The inequality indicators are listed at the bottom of the slide. So if you compare Flanders number 3 and Wallonia number 6, you can see that the income, the welfare is not well distributed. And if, until today, there are Flemish tax transfers, if they disappeared, well, Wallonia's income, disposable income, would drop by 10%, which is a lot. So this is one of the reasons why the Flemish do not want to pay for Wallonia anymore. Okay, language policy, the other question. I'm doing this very fast. The language debate is ongoing since 1830. But what is new is, well, not quite new, but at least since the 70s, 80s, is that the language question structures the political system, meaning that language is something immediately identifiable for citizens. They immediately know where they belong when we talk about language. So justice and fairness, Brussels, redistribution, and so forth are secondary to that first identification with my language community. So in that sense, language functions as an alibi for all kinds of other problems. And therefore, the language policy in Belgium is not very diplomatic. For instance, since the 90s, the two parts of the country are not obliged to learn the first language of the other side of the country anymore. The Walloons learn English, the Flemish learn English, and they do not learn the other language of the country anymore, which is a real problem in a federal state. Democratic genre. Here the question, don't look at the slide, it's too busy, but I think that here the two questions are, one, are multilingual democracies more fragile democracies? Question, maybe. This is probably not true for Switzerland, it's probably not true for Canada either, but it is true for Belgium, I would say. And two, Belgium is the example for consocialism. Is that still true today? Is consocialism in Belgium still efficient? If you look at, well, this is part of the answer. I think that linguistically divided states are more vulnerable democracies than unitarian states like France, for instance, but that's to be questioned. But if you look, let's not look at this, but at this constitutional, consociation, Thank you. If you look at the checklist of the ingredients of consocialism, Belgium actually still is a consocial democracy because there is cooperation at the federal level, co-nationality, at least legally, is respected. There are rights for minority groups, even immigrant groups have more rights in Belgium than in other European countries, France for instance. Proportionality in resources is still true today, will probably not be true anymore, and a whole set of special laws that when one community does not agree with voting a law, they can hinder the vote of the law if a majority of 2/3 exists in either of the two parts of the country. So, in principle, and according to the checklist, Belgium should still function, and Belgium is still an example for a healthy consocial democracy. But what is missing? I think, as I said, the overlapping electoral district, binational political parties, they don't exist anymore. No policy for Brussels. Where does Brussels belong? The consequence of no policy for Brussels is that Brussels is today autonomous, and Brussels does not want to belong to Wallonia, and vice versa. These are two different entities, and the problem of accountability. Okay. Now, one of my main points is that although the federal architecture is very sophisticated, probably one of the most sophisticated architectures among federal states, it is precisely because of the sophistication of this federal architecture that binationalism has failed, or to put it in another way, that binationalism exists, and that unitarian Belgium has no chance, according at least to a majority of my colleagues. If you look at the revisions, the constitutional revisions, let's not look at them, but let's only look at the results. The result is that thanks to the new constitution, well, the two communities have their own space, their own political space, their own political legitimacy, and in fact, the new constitution has completely divided the two communities because they are not accountable to the other part of the country. So the legislator underestimated, for good reasons of course, the consequences of federalism. The law is not the same for all anymore in Belgium. So for egalitarians like us, this is a real problem. If you look, this I will post to the website of the Steinmetz Center. It will be faster than to run you through through this checklist. But what you should look at is maybe the two first lines, because Belgian federalism is really a dissociation federalism with normative autonomy, as I said, very unlike associationist federalism like in Germany or in other countries, plus the empirical dynamics. There's a constant aggiornamento of not only the revisions until the 90s, it's going on, in fact.
Is it possible just to turn off the light that goes on the screen? No. Doesn't help.
Doesn't help? Absolutely. Okay, anyway, so this, if you want me, I will post this to the website. This we're not going to look at because I'm running out of time. What you should remember here is only the growth of non-traditional parties and the breakup of national parties. But this I already said. And here's one of the proofs. If you look at the last electoral results since 2007, you can see that the traditional parties dropped by almost 20%. In other words, people do not vote for traditional parties anymore. You know, the three pillars, socialist, liberal, Catholic, they vote for more and more for nationalist parties, but also for the green parties, and almost in the same proportions in the north and the south of the country. I should have another slide here. Yes, this is the growth of the N-VA. The N-VA is the Flemish Nationalist Party. They went up from 13.1 first 9% to 28, which is humongous. 1/3 of voters in Flanders vote for an extreme, not extreme, but for a nationalist, an assumed nationalist party. And the mayor of Antwerp, which is the biggest town in Flanders, is also the head of this nationalist party. Okay. What next? That's supposed to be the answer, but I don't really have an answer. The first one, back to Unitarianism, is not an option, of course. It's like, you know, when you vote a law, especially those liberal important laws and these dissociation laws, you can't go back. The split is also not possible, I would say, for two reasons. One, because of Brussels, and two, because of Europe. Belgium is a kind of laboratory of Europe as a whole. If Belgium splits, that would be really bad news for Europe. Although Europe sustains regionalism, as we know. There's a union of regions and so forth. But I think a split is not envisageable today. Now, yes, a post or binational democracy, I don't really know what that means. I know what that means for Europe. Theoretically, I don't really know what that would mean for Belgium. Post-nationalism, probably. But then voters in Flanders should really draw back and refrain from being nationalist. But there is hope, because as I said earlier, the language alibi exists, and the language is an alibi. So nationalism is not doomed to remain the principal force in Flanders. Constitutional patriotism, that would be again the European solution. Why not? But therefore we have to change the constitution once again and socialize people through both communities and not only one. Again, large accountability. Two, change in electoral law. Therefore also in Belgium we need a constitutional change to create again national parties. Today, some of the Green parties and some socialists are planning to create a new overlapping party. No, I was just, this is for Motti actually, because this is about colonialism, a part that Motti has worked on.
Talking to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let's skip this. I wanted to talk about pluralism, but pluralism in the sense of Furnival, where an association between two nations is viewed as a business partnership instead of a common democratic solidarity. But I think even that would go too far. Maybe one last solution, and then I'll stop here. I will just show you one last slide. Maybe one solution would be to make Brussels into a fourth region to have another kind of equilibrium between the main communities and the main regions. By the way, I forgot there's also a German-speaking community in the southeast of the country, 70,000 people approximately, but they don't really count, although they have everything on paper that the others have also. Let me just show you this. I love this slide. This is a slide we did with a colleague from New York in 2007, at exactly when the numbers of the Flemish nationalists went up. So this is Al Stepan. He had money, really, really loads of money. So we interviewed 10,000 people in Belgium. That's quite a lot for a poll. And we asked them on a scale from 5 to 1, what would you describe yourself as? Well, surprisingly, almost 70% said Belgian first, before saying from Brussels, or before saying I'm Flemish but Belgium, or I'm Walloon and Belgian. Almost 70%. So I don't know whether this is very telling, but that's probably why I'm still optimistic and why I think that besides from the technical problems, Brussels, Belgium will probably do very well in the next couple of years.
Thank you.